KZ Guy 2 here, No Nonsense Know-How. Today doing a timing belt and water pump on this 2002 Chrysler PT Cruiser, aka the PT Bruiser. This job, I'm going to give you a basic overview here and show you how to do the belt and the water pump. I'm not going to go into incredible detail, but I figure I'll show you guys the basics here of what you need to do and how to do it. Now I'm replacing this one because the water pump, here's the new pump, the water pump's leaking. So went ahead and got a Gates kit. This good quality kit. I'll put a link in the description for if you guys want to purchase a decent water pump timing belt kit. It's going to come with your belt, which is made in USA, the tensioner, and the idler pulley. Now looking at these instructions here, I'll just give you a view of that so you can pause it if you want to read that. But basically there's going to be a difference in the timing cover on this, so I'll have to look at that. You know, for the 2002 and older ones, there's going to be a difference to be able to use the newer style tensioner apparently. Now one thing I'd like to mention right off the rip here is if you don't have air tools, this job is going to be quite a bit more time consuming. Okay, so here's the point at which I'm ready to replace the belt. But to get to that point, I'll go through it with you real quick. First, not a bad idea to disconnect your battery. Second, go ahead and remove your radiator cap and drain the coolant. On the bottom of the radiator, there's a petcock down there. You just drain that out. Next, if you're on a lift, go ahead and get your car up. If you're not, get it up on jack stands would be nice. You're going to need a floor jack with a block of wood underneath the engine, like that. And I'm going to jump around here a little bit, but go ahead and remove your wheel, 5 19mm lug nuts, and then you're going to have this plastic cover in there. It's held on with 4 10mm screws and a couple Christmas trees like this. Not very hard to get off. Get your drive belt off. The alternator one, to get the back alternator one off. The adjuster is on the back side here, and the front belt is a this is a tensioner right here, 15mm. You just loosen that to get that belt off. Now once you have that plastic cover off, go ahead and 18mm on your crankshaft damper here, but rotate this until you have your timing marks lined up. Up top here, you see those 2 little notches. They're gonna go horizontal, facing each other perfectly horizontally. Now, get your crank pulley off. I recommend using the Chrysler tool like this. I'll put again in the description, I'll put a link for if you guys want to buy something that works for this well. But this grabs onto the back side of this is pretty good. You can use some of the aftermarket, you know, Harbor Freight 3-jaw pullers, but you might struggle a little bit because they're a little harder to sometimes get a bite on this. That one's specifically designed to do the Chrysler dampeners, whatever you want to call it. Alright, so of course we have our jack under there. Get your dog bone motor mount bolt out there. Then you're also going to use a T55 Torx and remove this mid motor mount bolt. Make sure you have your jack under there as well before doing that. And then come up top here. Now I don't know if you have to do it, but I did discharge the AC system and get those lines out of my way. I'm going to say I'm pretty sure you have to. Obviously you're going to want to use an AC machine and not just put that stuff out to the environment. Then you're going to go ahead and remove your upper motor mount, one 18mm, two 15mm. Get that out of your way. And also on the strut tower here, you're going to find this steel bracket here that's held on with 2 18mm nuts on the back side, 18mm bolt on the front, and then 2 10mm nuts holding your cruise control on there. So get that out of the way. And go ahead and remove your upper timing cover. Going to be 2 8mm bolts holding that on. And here's where it gets a little tricky. This is probably the hardest piece to get out of this car. This big cast iron bracket here. So basically that's going to be held on with 3 18mm bolts holding that on right here and here. And then your power steering pump is actually bolted on the back side. Back here, you're going to get in there and take those. You'll see the steel bracket that I'm pointing at. You're going to have 3 long bolts that look just like that. So get those off. And then it's a tight squeeze getting this thing out of here. So go ahead and remove your lower timing cover. Going to be 4 8mm bolts holding that on. You can see on the inside of this, we got quite a bit of oil and coolant residue all over there from leaking seals. This is also going to be a great time when you're doing this to replace your crankshaft seal and your camshaft seals as well. If they're not leaking, you don't have to, but definitely if this is your personal vehicle, you're better off doing this right when you're when you're in here. Do it right the first time so you don't have to go in here again. So if you're at this point now, you got your timing marks lined up, go ahead and loosen this 10mm bolt on your tensioner. And before taking this thing off, it's a great idea to mark the location of your belt on this cover and on the pulleys, also on the bottom as well. Just put some paint marks on there so that when you can transfer those over to the new belt, and that way there's zero room for error of you putting this thing on wrong. And of course, if your timing belt had jumped teeth or broke altogether, marking it's not really going to be an option. All right, and once that 10mm is loose, you can rotate this. I'm using a 1/4" hex. You rotate that and slip your belt off. Then you're going to go ahead and remove the two 18mm cam sprocket bolts, and also your idler pulley here. Mine's a 17mm hex on that. Yours might be different. And as soon as you get the belt off, go ahead and transfer those marks over to your new belt and get that out of the way. Pretty simple to do. Just line these grooves up and then walk your way all the way around. Get those two top ones, walk your way around and get the crankshaft mark as well. You don't have to do it that way, but there's definitely less room for error if you do. I do want to make note here, you guys probably already noticed this, but I lined my middle notches up here. I have these cams upside down. You probably want to rotate them to line up these two outer ones. So to gain access to the water pump, you're going to remove your timing cover. We can see this one actually has a couple cracks in it up top here, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to replace this. But go ahead and 3 10mm bolts and then 2 13mm on the back. That slides right out of the way. Now we can see this one's already been modified for the new tensioner, so that's what it's going to look like for you to fit that new tensioner in there, the one that's for the 2003 and later. So I can compare my new tensioner to the old one. They look the same. That's great. My idlers look the same as well. This one looks like it's 14 or 15mm threads or head on that bolt instead. Anyway, so you got that off. Go ahead in here. So go ahead and remove those 4 10mm bolts holding that pump on, and put a catch pan under there in case there's any more coolant inside the block, and get that thing out of there. I'm also going to take these covers over to the parts washer and clean all this gunk out and inspect them for any further damage. Alright, so upon taking this off, definitely an aftermarket pump, and we can see the bearing has failed. If I wiggle this up and down, I don't know if you guys can see that. Oh yeah, so that's why this thing was leaking. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up around that water pump area, cast iron area, check that for any problems on it using these cookies, probably on a die grinder like this. And go ahead and clean all that other sludge out of the way. Make sure not to wipe your marks off if you marked the belt location to the pulleys though. I noticed there's no O-ring retention grooves on this Gates pump here. So when you're putting this O-ring on here, go ahead and use a high quality import or even the right stuff, it's called silicone, but use a high quality silicone. Put a few dabs around there, then place your O-ring into place, making sure it's not going to fall out of place. And personally, some guys might say some things against it, but I also recommend putting a bead of silicone around this whole pump on the exterior surface of the ring. You don't want silicone getting on the inside here, but around the exterior. So you just have that second layer of protection for this pump. Go ahead and bolt that pump back on. All right, so we got that cleaned up pretty good in there. Got the new pump bolted in. Make sure to rotate that, make sure it goes freely. Also would be a good time to pull out and check your mid motor mount, because this is going to be the easiest time to replace that. So then go ahead and reinstall your covers. Got these all cleaned up. Again, I have one crack up here, but not going to be putting a new one of those on today. Would be a good idea though. And go ahead and bolt your idler pulley on and your cam sprockets back on. I do also recommend applying Loctite to all of the bolts that go on the inside of the timing cover, because if one of those was to ever rattle out, you'd be, in trouble more than likely. Also put a dab of Loctite on these camshaft bolts here, and these are going to be 75 foot-pounds, and your crankshaft pulley is going to be 100 foot-pounds. Okay, so when you're bolting this tensioner in, I lowered the engine down. This flat side right here, the flat side is going to go up against this piece right here, and then you're going to thread that bolt in and snug it down. All right, so once you have that tensioner on, go ahead and start putting your belt on. You start by putting on the cam pulleys there, and come down and walk it around your idler up there, your water pump, your crank pulley, and the last piece you're going to walk it around is your tensioner right there. Of course, you're going to still have the pin in there as well. Mine's already out. I did have to put the 1/4" hex in here and actually rotate this a little bit more to get some extra, you know, give out of there, to get this belt on there. It was actually really tight getting the belt on, but it's on there and it's good. Good tension once it actually went on. And then go ahead and snug your 10mm bolt down good and tight. You know, tighten that up. So anyway, the belt's on, and now I'm going to go ahead and throw this thing back together. By the way, once you put this thing on, rotate it by hand, clockwise, which is the direction the engine spins. At least 2 or 3 turns, full rotations. Make sure you don't have any binding, or you know that your belt's on correct, you know, because this is an interference engine, so you don't want to start this thing up and bend your valves. But just to show you, here are your timing marks and where it should be when you originally take this belt off. These 2 triangles lining up perfectly with each other, and then coming up top, you can see now my cams are, again, I took it off when it was out 180, but not a big deal, because you had marks on both sides of the cams. But you can see now these are perfectly lined up in the center. All right, as I'm going back together here, I got a tip for you. I did put this mid-mount in first. Originally, I took that out thinking I had to get this out of my way, but I think I couldn't get the engine jacked up high enough with the crankshaft pulley still on there. So once I took that off, you can get this thing up high enough to be able to get this bracket out without taking the mid-mount out. So another tip here, as you're putting this thing on, get the 3 bolts started on it, and then get your pump lined up and get those bolts started. You know, get all 3 of the pump bolts started, these guys, before tightening them down. This thing's a little bit of a bear to get in there because it's kind of tight, to get your pump lined up and all that. But anyway, now all that's on there, it's going to be smooth sailing from here. And one more tip for you on this crank pulley. You're going to get this thing started on here. This is a press fit on here. It doesn't matter what direction it goes on. It's not keyed or anything. But once you get this bolt started and you torque it down, go ahead and put a big socket over here like this, hit it real hard with the hammer so you make sure this thing's seated against the crankshaft in there, and then go ahead and retorque, maybe even do it again, hit it again real hard with the hammer, retorque, so you know this is set properly. All right guys, got this all back together, running good, burping out the air out of the coolant. End of the day, I can add 1 more pin to my timing belt collection of pins that all the belts I've done here. Kind of a neat thing to do. Anyway, KZ Guy 2, No Nonsense Know How. Please give me a thumbs up if it helped you out. And otherwise, comments, appreciate them. I understand you might do things a little differently, so that's cool too. Let me know if you know any pointers, and I'll try to get those links in there for you guys, for the timing belt kit, the puller, and if there's anything else I can think of, you know, we'll try to get that in there as well. So, thanks guys.